Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do another session of Was the Book Better? And this time I'm going to talk about Dune. If I was a little smarter, I would have put this video out probably a couple weeks ago as the movie was coming out, but oh well, you know. Also, a little disclaimer, so that way no one accuses me of clickbait in the title. I'm not going to be discussing the new movie that just came out in 2021 for two reasons. One, I haven't seen it yet, so I can't really comment on it. And then two, it's not done yet. And I think I don't want to talk about half of a movie or half of a story. From what I've been told, the movie that just came out only covers about half the book. So what I might do is when the sequel comes out, because they've decided they're going to be a sequel, and maybe I'll do another version of Was the Book Better specifically for these new movies. I believe the second movie is supposed to come out in 2023, so you'll have to wait a bit. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to talk about Dune the Book, the movie, by the 1984 movie, I believe, by Frank Herbert. I mean, not Frank. The book by Frank Herbert, the movie by David Lynch, and then I'm also talking about the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries, which something I've surprised most people don't even know really exists. Don't know where you'll find it. But the book was written by Frank Herbert. I believe it came out sometime in the 1950s. I always like to compare it as the Lord of the Rings of science fiction. They came out, I think, about the same time. They are both epic in scope. They both have dedicated fan bases that have been around since the book first came out and don't really seem to be showing any signs of slowing down. And they're also really known for their world building. Lord of the Rings was Tolkien's sort of answer to the Icelandic sagas. He wanted like an Anglo-Saxon version of the Icelandic sagas. They didn't really have one, and so he pulled a lot of his inspiration from Icelandic sagas, the folklore of Germany and Europe, and the British Isles and that sort of thing. Dune was a little different. It's definitely known for its world building, and his is taking place, I think, like, I forget how many tens of thousands of years into the future. And so it's basically humanity just sort of evolved past what we think of. And there's this long backstory that he only really alludes to in the book. Dune is really sort of like the chronicles of Princess Erlon, who was like the imperial historian. And we kind of figure out how that came to be, but a lot of the chapters start with her quotes about events that happened as if you already knew about those events. And so for that, I think some people find it a little difficult to get into, but I found that, I don't know, I've read the book multiple times. It's probably my favorite book just because I've read it probably 4 or 5 times and listened to the audiobook at least a couple of times. And so I love the rich history, the different cultures, the political intrigue, and I think that's the main thing that the book is known for, is the intrigue between the different houses. In that way, it almost feels like a fantasy type book, because you have these different houses, they're competing with each other. There's the Empire, which kind of seems all-powerful, but obviously it isn't, because it's really worried about House Caledon, which is Paul Atreides' house. And so it's really great in that sense. It pulls in elements of ecology and even energy dependence, which I don't know if anyone is even talking about back in when this book was written, but you know, nowadays the world runs on oil. If the oil stops flowing, the whole world grinds to a halt. And that was kind of what was going on in the Dune books. The spice must flow. Through the spice, that's how the guild navigators are able to fold space and move from one place to another. If you stop flowing the spice, pretty much the universe reverts back to what we think of it today, where everybody's just stuck on one planet and that's it. There's no more, sort of galactic control of things. it pulls in lots of spirituality. It's a very spiritual book, which I think is very interesting. It catches a lot of people off guard that there's stories of messianic stories in that is where he kind of Frank Herbert pulls in a lot of Islamic, Middle Eastern, Judeo-Christian allegories and examples. He kind of uses that. It's a very complicated book. It's very hard to talk about because there's so many layers to it. And basically, if you're a fan of science fiction, you need to read it because just like Lord of the Rings, the way science fiction was done before and after Dune is totally different. Just like with the Lord of the Rings, the way fantasy was told before the Lord of the Rings is very different than afterwards. A similar analogy is Star Wars. If you look at science fiction of the 70s, 60s, and 70s before Star Wars, it's totally different than how it is after Star Wars. The closest you can get was Stanley Kubrick's 2001, and that just kind of gives you an idea of like how much of a visionary Stanley Kubrick was. But look at something like Logan's Run. It was a great movie. I love it. Saw it when I was a kid in the theaters. But that's a very, very different kind of story than Star Wars, and then a lot of the stuff that kind of came after that. And the same thing was with Dune. If you like military science fiction, you'll probably like Dune because that kind of had a lot to do with it. If you like political intrigue, sort of like basically like the Game of Thrones series, you'll like Dune because it's a lot of that same kind of stuff going on. It's like I said, there's just so much going on. It's really hard to nail down what exactly to talk about. There's the world building aspects with the mentats. He kind of does this great thing that really a lot of good authors should do, which is ask what if. What if this wasn't true? Or what if this was true? What if this world was kind of different? And in the Dune universe, what he played with was this idea of what if there weren't computers? What if we were forbidden from using computers the way we think we should? And again, he alludes to it in the book, but it's covered in other volumes, the Butlerian Jihad, that at some point in our future, their past, humans invented what we'd call AI, or artificial intelligence. They made machines to think like humans. And then people became extremely decadent and lazy, and then the machines basically just sort of took over and enslaved everybody. And then they had a guy named Butler led humanity in a revolt against the machines and took over. It's called the Butlerian Jihad. And one of the almost religious edicts of the time was that thou shalt not make a computer that thinks like a man. And so you can't have super artificial intelligence supercomputers, but you still need to do that kind of work. And so then humans started to develop their own mental capabilities to replace the machines. And so then you got the guild navigators who could, through advanced physics, which almost took on like a magical process, could teleport over long distances. You had the mentats, which were basically like human computers that could calculate very quickly and retain huge amounts of information. And then you got the Bene Gesserit, which were kind of interesting, that those were all women. They all had to be women. All of the mentats had to be men, but all of the Bene Gesserits were women, and they could manipulate people's emotions, and they used psychology and sociology against people. They understood culture better, and so they could manipulate people behind the scenes. Just great stuff like that. I think there was there in future books, because he wrote Dune, and then there was like Dune Messiah and Chapter House Dune. There's a few other books. None of them really held up to the first one. And that's kind of a shame. It's one of those things. The first book is so great, and then after that, it kind of starts to fail a little bit. For my problem, I think because I've read the sequel and I think the third book in the trilogy, and I kind of quit because after a while it started to feel like a soap opera. Who does Paul Atreides love? Who does he get along with? All these old problems with an old friend of his who we thought was dead but came back to life. But maybe he is dead. We don't really know. Then after a while, I kind of like, yeah, it just doesn't have the same punch as the original book. One of the problems that the 1984 movie had, and always had, was that it was a singular movie. When David Lynch made the movie back in the 80s, no one really talked about doing trilogies. Like today, it's pretty much a no-brainer. When they decided to make the new Dune movies, no one expected that the movie maker was going to try and shove the whole book into one movie. And audiences today are perfectly fine with that. Thanks to all the Marvel movies, thanks to the Lord of the Rings movies, thanks to the Matrix movies, and a bunch of others I'm sure I'm forgetting. People are fine with getting sort of like a chapter of a story, of an or overarching story. And so no one really expects to go to watch this movie Dune and see the whole book from beginning to end, because most people wouldn't want to sit through that. And so, unfortunately, when David Lynch made his movie, people weren't really doing that. And so the movie studio basically wanted the entire Dune book put into one movie, which meant that David Lynch had to cut out a whole bunch of stuff. Princess Erlon, who is actually a big factor in the book, is kind of relegated to like a side character, a narrator at the beginning, and someone who just sort of stands in the background at the end. Fade Rotha, the sort of nephew of Baron Harkonnen. If you read the book, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. But that was the Sting character. Well, in the movie, nobody really knew what the hell Fade was about. He's there. He seems kind of menacing. It's Sting. You get to see him all almost naked in the shower and stuff, looking kind of weird, but it doesn't really explain who he is or what he's about. Whereas in the book, we get a lot more depth and that sort of stuff. That said, I still love the 1984 version of Dune. I saw it when it first came out in the theaters. I didn't understand a damn thing about it. Neither did my dad. My dad was always more of a fantasy reader, so he's the one who introduced me to like Conan and the Dragon Riders of Perth and those sort of things. But he didn't read Dune. He didn't really get it. But I still loved it. I think partly it's because I just like David Lynch. He's always been my favorite director. I'm also okay with this kind of weird, kind of spooky, ooky, kind of semi-mystical teachings and a lot of whispering and things like that. I'm fine with watching movies where I don't necessarily know everything. The whole story isn't all wrapped up in a nice, neat little bow. I don't need the director to explain to me what the story is about. I love the fact that he refuses to do so, assuming he even knows the movie's about himself, which he'll admit to sometimes. The problem with David Lynch is that he's an artiste. He's an artist. He likes to tell his own stories with his own characters in his own way, with very little outside input. Certainly not from like a studio where they're basically worried about bean counting. He will accept outside input from like the creators, the people he's working with. If you watch another video I made called Happy Accidents, that's, at least as far as I'm aware of, that's where that term came from. That's at least where I've heard it, was that he's fine with something happening on the set and just kind of going with it because it seems right and it feels right and that sort of thing. Well, on Dune, he can't do that sort of stuff. This was a big budget, maybe the biggest budget he's ever worked with. It was the studio's little baby. They wanted it to take off and do really well, and so they were constantly up his butt on like how things were being made, what things looked like, what changes he could make into the script. Basically, they just had a lot more control over what he was making, and so he never really even thought of it as kind of like his movie, and he still, to this day, kind of hates it, which I think is a real shame, because it's still a great movie. It's visually beautiful, and that's one of the struggles that I think anyone has with reproducing Dune, is that's the standard. Visually, that's the standard that people have to work up against. In my mind, the guild navigators look like the creepy dudes in the Dune movie. Baron Harkonnen has all these pussy things all over them, which I'm not even sure if isn't true in the book. I don't remember anything like that. He was always very fat, and he always had this little hollow belt to kind of help move him along. But I don't remember all the weird pustules and things like that. A little side note about the 1984 movie was that David Lynch was still kind of a new kid in Hollywood. He had made Eraserhead, which was a big deal. I believe he had made the Elephant Man by that point. But I don't know if he'd done many other projects. I'm sure there were some others. And so he was able to finagle a deal to where if he made Dune, they would let him make his own movie his own way, however he wanted. And that movie was Blue Velvet. And Blue Velvet was truly the movie that launched David Lynch's career. Also, what was interesting is if you follow his career, a lot of the people in the Dune movie, he enjoyed working with them, and he just kept seeing them over and over again. That was the first movie in which he worked with Kyle MacLachlan, who then went on to be in Blue Velvet, who then went on to be in Twin Peaks, and I think maybe a couple other David Lynch projects. If you don't have Dune, then you don't have a lot of these other actors that he worked with that just kind of kept going with him, even to the point of I think her name's Alicia Witt. She played the little girl who played, or she was the little girl who played Alia, Saint Alia of the Knife, and she was in Twin Peaks, and I think she was in the remake of Twin Peaks and some other stuff as well. So in my mind, that always also makes it kind of a special kind of movie. But then we get to the next iteration, which was the Syfy Mini-Series. I have no idea where you can find it. It was produced in Czechoslovakia. Yay, go Czechoslovakia. And it's really good, but it suffers. It's almost like it's a mirror version of David Lynch's movie, The Dune. They have a very low budget, so the costumes I've seen cosplay that looks better than a lot of the costumes. The sets look pretty nice, but they can't keep everything dark, so I don't think you can really see like how cheap the sets really are. It's a very small scope, so when they have the big epic battles, they don't really look very epic because they don't have the budget for a whole lot of guys, that sort of thing. They don't have a lot of big name actors. I know William Hurt is in it. He plays the father who gets killed. That might be it. I'm kind of struggling. I'd have to look it up. Maybe I'm forgetting someone else. But I don't really think there's any other big name actors. I'm not sure if William Hurt counts as big name either, but at least I know him. But what it does have that David Lynch's movie doesn't have is time. It was a miniseries. It was not meant to be a whole book crammed into 2 hours. I believe it all total is like 5 or 6 hours. It was over the course of a few nights that it was put out. And so it's pretty much got everything in it. They did a very good job of taking the book and turning it into a movie format. Princess Irulan plays a much larger role than she does in the David Lynch movie. We kind of figure out what's going on with Fade Rautha and how he's really sort of a mirror to Paul Atreides. We get to see a lot more of the political intrigue and the infighting and all the other stuff. It's just kind of a shame that it looks cheap because it kind of was. It kind of needed to be. But it's still very good, and I think it's still worth watching. If for no other reason, then maybe you don't want to read the whole book. Maybe sci-fi isn't your thing or whatever. Then you can kind of just watch the movie, and that will kind of give you a really good idea of what the story is all about. They also did another miniseries, which I believe was the first two, the sequels, Book 2 and Book 3, and they just didn't hold up. This is definitely where Frank Herbert had sort of the sophomore experience, where a lot of times people's first first book that hits it really big, it just kind of eclipses everything that they do afterwards. I've heard this with a lot of bands. Why does the second album of a band suck so bad? And the one explanation is that, well, when they were making the first album, or the first book in this case, they had years to work on it. And it was truly just a labor of love at that point. They were making it because they liked it, because they wanted to. They had all this time to work on it and to perfect it and make it sound the way they wanted or read the way they wanted, depending on how they what we're working on. And so then it comes out and it's this huge splash. And then some publisher or some music studio says, well, great, do that again. Can you do it in about 4 months? No. And so maybe that's kind of what was going on with Frank Herbert as well. The reason why I don't think Lord of the Rings suffered from that was because really those 3 books was one long ass book, and the publisher told them, we're not gonna publish this. You need to break this down into 3 books. And so really, I think that's one of the reasons why all 3 of those books hold up and Lord of the Rings so well, is they're really just one book, just in 3 very big parts. Whereas Dune was itself just one good book, and then after that just kind of, fell. But I would definitely recommend watching. I'd recommend all of these. I'm a huge fan of the book. Like I said, there's so much there to talk about, and it's still got a huge fan base. They're still putting out books. I believe Frank Herbert's son was writing on these books. I don't know if he still is or somebody else is, but they're still cranking out the books in that world. Also looking at different time periods. Like you can read the book on the Butlerian Jihad and see the humanity fighting against the robots. I would definitely recommend watching the David Lynch movie. Like I said, I liked it. A lot of people talk about how it doesn't make sense and they can't follow it. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I had no problems with all that stuff. But again, I like David Lynch stuff. I'm okay with a little ambiguity in my stories. But it's really good. It's definitely a beautiful story. And then I'd suggest watching the old Sci-Fi miniseries, if you can find it. I'll have to look around and see if I can find a link to it somewhere. Someone is bound to have uploaded it to a streaming site, on YouTube or something else. Or maybe you can find a DVD of it someplace. Do people use DVDs? I do. But anyway, tell me what you think. Have you read Dune? Do you like Dune? What did you think of the David Lynch movie? Was this, did you hate it? Do you love it? It seems like a lot of people kind of fall in those 2 camps. Have you ever seen the sci-fi? Did you even know it existed before I talked about it? But anyway, let me know in the comments. I will talk to you later. Bye.